The following presentation is a production of Ride the Wave Media.
It's the Best Birth Podcast, where we interview experts that elevate you as you prepare your heart and mind to have the best birth.
Each episode will interview professionals so you are prepared for pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Our experts will build your confidence and empower you to trust your intuition throughout your pregnancy.
This audio is taken from videos on YouTube. Watch the entire episodes on YouTube at Birth Made Mindful. You're listening to the Best Birth Podcast. We're here today on the show with Brittany Fox, a nutritional therapy practitioner.
Brittany is a nutritional therapy practitioner who specializes in postpartum depletion and hormone health. Brittany helps moms who are struggling with their health after kids to replenish their bodies and improve their symptoms. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
This is such an important topic and one that I'm sure you know affects all of us. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a nutritionalist?
Yes. So I had 3 babies and, every couple of years, like a lot of women do. And after each baby, I just felt a little bit worse. Mm-hmm. Like I just couldn't quite keep up. I felt really tired. I just started having weird symptoms. And despite looking for help, having labs done, things like that, no one really could give me answers. Everything always looked normal, but I didn't feel great. And through my own health journey and some issues with chronic illness and things like that, I eventually went back to school, became a nutritionist, and specialized in postpartum hormone health.
Have you found that this specific, studies and like looking into nutrition has a lot more to do with how we're feeling after babies than a lot of the other, solutions that are out there?
Yes, everything comes into play. And the term postnatal depletion encompasses a lot of things. So not just nutrition, but mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. There's a lot of depletion that can happen. And we all know that postpartum is a lot harder than we expect it to be. I think if you talk to any mom, they will say, wow, that was harder than I thought. And all of that plays into the depletion. And yes, nutrients are critical. And as we start replenishing those and supporting the body, then we start feeling better. But we also need to look at other aspects of our health and encompass the whole body of kind of what's going on.
And is there a time frame that we're mainly looking at? Or are you speaking about years and years of depletion that then kind of like stacks up on each other? And that's why a lot of us who are here with 2 and 3 babies are starting to feel like, wow, will I ever feel like myself again?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it logically, we get pregnant and a lot of moms will then go on to breastfeed, and then they may stop nursing for a little while, but then they get pregnant again, and then they're breastfeeding again. And that each time we are giving to our child. And unless we are really intentional about how we are replenishing, then our body is likely going to struggle to keep up with those demands. And so we do need to be intentional. And a lot of moms, they maybe notice after their first baby, like, wow, I don't feel great. But then a few, 6 to 8 months, they're like, okay, I'm starting to feel more like myself. But then after their second baby, it's a little bit slower recovery, after their third. And yes, it would kind of layer on those different depletions and things like that.
It feels like hiking Mount Everest, where you get acclimated, you catch your breath, and you're thinking, oh, I'm doing great. We've got this sleep thing figured out, or you've got the nursing figured out. And then, like you said, all of a sudden you kind of like tank again.
Yeah.
So what are some practical solutions that we should be doing so that we can feel great?
I kind of want to go back to your first question, and then we'll go address that. A lot of my clients that come to me are actually later in postpartum. And so there's this misconception that postpartum is 6 weeks to 6 months. That's not the reality. So I want moms to understand that even if you're a couple years postpartum and you don't feel well, there are things that you can do. Taking a holistic approach. So making sure that we are replenishing our body. I do think that if you're feeling really awful or if you're having weird symptoms, that testing is really beneficial. And having some blood work done. I offer a testing in my practice called a hair tissue mineral analysis, where we're looking at the mineral status of what's going on, patterns and things like that, because that's commonly depleted in pregnancy and breastfeeding. And then just really focusing on nervous system health. I have several things, and we can break all into them, but the message is I want moms to know there's stuff that you can do. And if you don't feel well, that there are answers out there.
I recently saw my primary care provider and asked if my levels could be tested, if I could get some hormone health, and everything came back looking great. Everything came back looking normal. So what are some of the specifics on your test that are actually showing the depletions?
So I use functional blood chemistry, so I'm not looking at diagnostic ranges, I'm looking at optimal ranges. So that alone is different, and finding someone who offers that, a lot of functional medicine doctors, naturopaths, nutritionists will use those type of labs, and it's traditional blood work, but it's how they're reading it and how they're looking at it, and seeing what is optimal and what is suboptimal, because we don't want to be sick, we don't want these things to turn into a disease, but if we don't feel good, it's kind of like a spectrum. And so catching it early, or just kind of catching those things that are slightly off, can be really helpful.
Maybe we can walk into before, during, and after pregnancy. What are some things we could do before to even prevent some of this or help knowing that it's going to happen?
Being aware that this is going to happen is the first step. My body is going to give a lot to my baby. It is designed to do that, and that's a really, really beautiful thing that it does. But being aware that it will provide for the baby at all cost, even at your own cost. So for example, if a mother's diet doesn't contain sufficient DHA, we know that that's really important for baby, her body will start pulling from her nutrient stores, commonly her brain. And then we notice a lot of baby brain, baby fog. What is that term? Brain fog in postpartum, where moms are like, I just am not functioning. And there's a lot of things coming into play with that, but one of the things is that your nutrients have been given to baby and your body needs some replenishment.
Is that a DHA supplement?
So I always try to take a food-based approach first. I think that just taking general supplements can actually do more harm than good sometimes, unless you're working with someone who's trained to do so. But this is going to look like wild caught fish, chia seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts, different things that are going to have those omega-3 fatty acids. That's just an example, though, of making sure that during preconception, you're preparing your body for what it's going to give baby, and then being aware during pregnancy, I need a lot of nourishment.
Have you written a book? Do we have some tangible?
I don't have a book yet. I do have a free replenishment guide for postpartum moms and a nourished motherhood guide that walks through kind of everything that I do with my one-on-one clients to help them get back to feeling better, because not a lot of people can work one-on-one with someone. And so I've tried to create different resources so that moms can have some education around it.
That's wonderful. Where can they find that?
That's a really great question. Can you put them in the show notes? Or
Yes.
You can find it through my Instagram account, but I know that a lot of women may not have that. And so...
And the name of your practice is that Deep Roots Nutrition.
You talked about DHA. Do you work specifically to prepare the uterus, or is it mostly whole body?
It's a whole body approach. And the beautiful thing about our bodies is they want to function optimally. And they just need certain raw cofactors to be able to do so. And so really during pregnancy, we're focusing on just optimal nourishment all around. Protein is really, really critical during pregnancy because of how much growth and change is happening. Your uterus is growing, your breasts are growing, you're growing a human that requires a lot of those amino acids to be able to do so, but also eating sufficient calories. We live in a day and age where women have spent most of their lives being taught to eat less. But during pregnancy, you actually need a lot of nourishment to be able to grow the baby, but also for proper blood volume expansion and for the health of the placenta. And minerals are really, really critical, so making sure you're including a lot of mineral-rich foods. This is going to look like anything from the earth. Plant and animal are going to contain minerals, but trying to eat less processed foods and more whole foods is going to be helpful with that.
You spoke of our growth, but you didn't talk about our glutes growing and our biceps growing. I always felt it was really weird in pregnancy that like my arms would just get bigger, and without any sort of change really to my diet. Like I was still eating a salad for lunch and trying to be healthy, but I felt like there was growth all around, and really also coming to a mental awareness that the growth was good and that preventing any sort of enlargement of my body was actually not serving my mental capacity, but just recognizing that growth and change was a positive and natural function, and that it was for the benefit of my baby.
Yeah. And that, again, is another misconception that we see in society, is that we should try to restrict weight gain during pregnancy. The reality is, if you are consuming whole foods and you're nourishing your body to provide for your baby, trusting that your body knows what it's doing is really, really beautiful, because it does. It's infinitely wise. And if we kind of just get out of the way and trust our body, it can do really incredible things. And there are reasons that we gain more fat during pregnancy. and it's healthy for us, and it will actually be easier for us in postpartum if we are wanting to lose some of that fat through pregnancy, if we are more nourished during pregnancy, because the body will see it as a sign of danger if we are malnourished, if we're not eating enough, and it will actually conserve. But if we trust our body to gain what it needs to and to lose what it needs to, then we actually can stop, riding that hamster wheel of working against our body.
Well, and there's such a difference between like weight gain and weight loss and then fat gain and fat loss. Because it feels like if you took every component of your body during pregnancy, like how much water weight, how much is, like your bone density, how much is the baby itself, a lot of those pounds will pretty much disappear right when you have the baby. I remember weighing myself the day after I had my baby, I had lost 25 pounds. Now I still had more to go because I had gained different parts of that weight, and your body takes time to change and grow. But recognizing, like you said, that nourishing your body is completely different than you just like gaining fat to your body. Yeah, it absolutely is. And bringing up that point, there are many things that are happening. The weight of all of the different things. Our blood volume is expanding by 50 to 60%. Like, that's a lot more blood we have running through our veins. And recognizing that if the body does store fat, it's for the health of you and your baby. It's a protective mechanism. And when we try to really restrict that, then we can actually end up doing more harm than good. Have you worked quite a bit like with the mental connection and physical connection of our bodies and like how this all takes place during pregnancy? Like if we have a better mental acceptance of this whole process, do you find that the body responds more favorably? Yes, because our nervous system is critical to our health. And that's something that I've learned through the years of working with moms through my own issues, and then now working with moms in this capacity, is that the way that we are constantly stressed and all of the stressors that are coming in, external or internal, really, really impact us. And by kind of just settling into that trust of your body, we can relieve a lot of that stress. And it's a lot of stress that we're actually putting on ourselves and we may not even realize. But those internal thoughts and those internal feelings will affect everything. And it's kind of almost like we're working against ourselves when our body's like, hey, trust me, I've got you. I've always had you and I have you now.
I'm able to tell when I'm more stressed because my hair gets thinner. It a lot of times happens. Yeah. And I was curious too, do you work with women in pregnancy or do they mostly come to you after?
Yeah, I would say the majority of my clients are postpartum moms, but I do have several clients that have come to me for preconception or during pregnancy. A lot of women, it's when they start recognizing symptoms. And so that's when they're like, hey, help, I need help somewhere, and then they find me.
Moving on to the postpartum phase, how can we replenish the depletion?
So first, being aware that at early postpartum is critical how we care for ourselves. So those first couple months, honestly, being really mindful of how we are nourishing ourselves, who is around us, and how much we're resting is going to be really important. Digestive function actually decreases in early postpartum for a lot of different reasons, because the body has to send energy elsewhere to heal, to make breast milk, and to do all of these other things, and so digestive function will decrease. So in early postpartum, focusing on warm, well-cooked foods, broths, stews, cooked foods, instead of like salads or smoothies, because the body's actually going to have a harder time digesting those raw fibers from their vegetables, versus cooking them already breaks down some of those things. So that would be the first step. Focusing on eating enough, eating warm, well-cooked foods in early postpartum, and really focusing on minerals, because that is an area that I see women really, really struggling. But then as we start to go on in postpartum, something that I see with the majority of the women I work with is that moms aren't actually eating enough. And sometimes it's intentional, but most of the time it's unintentional. They're busy. We are busy and we're stressed, and we wake up in the morning and we go hours without eating because we have to take care of baby, we have to take care of these kids, we have to take care of this, and then all of a sudden we're shaky and irritable and like, I need to eat now. And what we don't realize is that's spiking our stress hormones, which are going to impact all of our other hormones that are kind of trying to come back online. And so eating enough is one of my number one rules for moms. Make sure you're eating enough every day. Do not skip breakfast. Eat sufficient protein. Get your minerals. And don't skip meals. They're kind of really big factors there.
You touched on minerals coming from plants and animals. Are there any other ways we can get those minerals?
Yeah, well, through water, we can get them anyway through the earth. We can apply like magnesium lotion topically, things like that. But I have found the easiest way is kind of focusing on whole foods, and because that's going to have the most abundance of minerals. And the fact that a lot of our water is now contaminated, a lot of people are using filtered water, which is great because we're filtering out a lot of those contaminants. But a lot of times, especially with like reverse osmosis or things like that, we're actually filtering out all of the minerals too. And so people don't realize that that can actually then contribute to depletion. And so being mindful of that, if you are using a filtered water, maybe adding some trace minerals back in, and just really trying to get as many as you can from
Adding those
sources.
trace minerals reminded me of like drinking a little bit of seawater. Like when you're swimming in the ocean, you're like, wow, that's like really salty.
Yeah.
And so they recommend like 10 drops into your water
Yeah.
or something. And I always felt like I'm like drinking salt water.
Yeah. And it does taste like that. And real salt from the earth actually has a lot of beautiful minerals in it. And so even the quality of the food that we're already eating, if we prioritize whole foods, so instead of iodized table salt, doing real sea salt that hasn't been refined, then you're naturally going to be adding more minerals back into your diet. And so just small little things like that can be really helpful and add up.
You spoke about supplements and how like getting the food from the source is typically better. Are there any supplements that you find, or is it mainly like you do the test, you got to find out like where your iron's at, where your magnesium is at, if you need the B6, you have to just test internally before you can start adding all these supplements?
I prefer to only use supplements when I know what's going on because it can cause issues. Iron, for example, too much iron is not good for our body. And so sometimes people are like, oh, postpartum, you have to take an iron supplement, but maybe your body doesn't need it and it could actually be causing more harm than good. But in general, I actually really enjoy beef organs or animal organs, animal organ blends, preferably instead of a single organ, because then you're getting a variety of nutrients and not too much of one thing. There's different really good quality prenatals out there. I know there's a few different brands that have postnatals now for replenishing. I would recommend having some form of a multivitamin, a prenatal, something like that you're taking. I also find that an omega-3 DHA supplement, I prefer a raw cod liver oil is going to be best for replenishing that. And then some trace minerals or things like that can be really helpful. So more general supplements instead of targeted.
Yeah. And you speak a lot about, the nutrients. Are there other things that are going to play a factor into this? How does moving our body affect our depletion and then replenishing that after a baby?
Yeah. Well, and that's such a great question. And a lot of people don't realize that the stress of postpartum will actually continue the depletion. So it's not just pregnancy, like, okay, I grew a baby and now I'm depleted. It's the stress of not sleeping, of navigating a newborn, and all of that continues to deplete the body. And so being aware that all of these things are coming to play. And sometimes when we're really stressed, really high intensity workouts or kind of jumping back into things are actually not going to be best for our body, and they are going to further deplete it. And so I encourage moms to listen to how they feel. Like, do I feel good when I exercise, or do I feel worse? If I feel worse, maybe I focus on low intensity exercising, walking, yoga, some strength training, and avoiding that high intensity. And to be honest, most of my clients, I actually discourage them from high intensity workouts just because postpartum's so stressful and we need a little bit more balance with the stress that's coming into our life. And so low intensity is a little bit better during those stressful times.
It's so tricky because many of us have all or nothing mentality.
Yeah.
Where if I can't like get back into my weightlifting routine or back to my HIIT class, then, like I might as well just sit on the couch all day.
Yeah, exactly.
But finding that balance of like, here I am, I'm 2 weeks postpartum and I can work on my breathing exercises.
Yes.
And focus on the leg lifts or the movements.
Yeah.
And building so gradually that it's just like one step at a time.
Yeah.
And that way we don't feel like we are taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that you brought that up, of how important it is to kind of rebuild in postpartum. So our core, our pelvic floor, our muscle strength, there's so much that's changed. And it's also important to recognize that in early postpartum, for those first 6 months or so, the relaxin hormone is still there and it's still kind of balancing out. And so jumping back into really intense exercise can actually lead to injuries if our body isn't ready for that. And so really kind of layer on layer rebuilding and making sure your body's ready for that. not just physically, but also emotionally, nutritionally, mentally. Are we ready for the type of exercise we're doing?
And do you find that those who are continuing their workout regimen during pregnancy have an easier time, or would you say the 6 months postpartum applies to everyone of just monitoring the level of intensity?
I mean, I think being aware for at least for everyone. But I do think if you've already been exercising, you have different muscle strength, and it probably will be easier to get back in, especially core and pelvic floor. If you've already been working on that throughout your pregnancy, you've been intentional about it postpartum, then all of that's going to come into play. But it's multifaceted, and everyone's body is going to be so different. And this is where I encourage mothers, listen to your intuition and what is it kind of calling to you.
When I was feeling ready to get back into exercise and just what it would look like as a new normal, I remember Googling all the exercises for beginners, because it really was like just restarting, like you said, and just reintroducing it all. In talking about hormone health, what are some of the tests or what does the test look like?
So this is an interesting question, because a lot of moms, we have the misconception of like, oh, my hormones are off, I need to test my hormones. But in reality, I'm looking at what would be causing hormones to be off in the first place, because we can test your hormones, but they fluctuate so much. Even throughout the month, it's ideal to test at different times to see where your ranges are, or using really expensive testing like a Dutch test, which you can actually even do when you're breastfeeding. And so I am looking at foundations, what could be throwing things off, and then working on those, because hormones are a symptom of something else being off. They're not actually the root cause. Something else is contributing to that. And so I'm looking at blood chemistry and an HTMA. I have all my clients do a really extensive health history, food and mood journal. We're kind of looking at everything. And I would say probably 98% of the time we actually don't have to go on to do further testing, because things naturally start to balance out. And that's the beautiful thing about the body, is it knows what to do when you give it what it needs.
And I love that that comes back to your premise of deep roots. It's finding out what are the causes and how are they related, and then getting a balance that way.
Yeah, exactly.
It feels like we always talk about our hormones in conjunction with our cycles. But you also spoke about the hormones that could just be like dysregulated. So are you looking at more your cortisol levels and your serotonin, and how often are you increasing your oxytocin? Are those all things that are also going to affect how the depletion has, changed our body?
So when I'm looking at hormones or even foundational things, cortisol and insulin are actually going to be really big hormones that we're paying attention to. If cortisol is really high, then other hormones like estrogen and progesterone are going to not be where they should be. And the same with insulin. So I actually spend a lot of time working on blood sugar regulation with all of my clients, because that is at the foundation of hormone health. And actually, if blood sugar is dysregulated, your hormones will not be balanced. And so it's kind of just like chasing symptoms unless you address that first. And so looking at those hormones that are released in relation to our stress, into our like glucose response and things like that, are actually going to have a domino effect on all other hormones. And so I pay really close attention to those, as well as with cortisol, how is our nervous system functioning? A lot of moms are in fight or flight. They found that every time the baby cries, a mother's fight or flight response may be triggered. That's happening multiple times a day, day after day. Mindful of the fact that moms are often in a fight or flight mode, or kind of flipping back and forth, and helping them to learn how to kind of regulate back down, so then they're not staying with those high stress hormones, is also going to be helpful with those other hormones. Especially because in postpartum, it takes time for them to start coming back online. And what we want is them to kind of just come back online more smoothly, instead of like, some turbulence. And so that's why I decided to focus on those things with moms.
You talked about bringing you back down with the fight or flight. Could you walk us through some of those ways to regulate your nervous system?
One of my favorites for moms is spending more time in nature. So when I have a mom that comes to me that's really, really struggling, especially with postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, it sometimes is too much to add a lot of things on their plate. And so one of the very first things I will do is recommend that they spend time outside every single day. Anytime that you are feeling kind of like this is hard, this is like, that flustered feeling that we all feel as moms, finding time to go outside. Even in that moment, you can take your baby out with you and be out in the sunshine. A lot of people don't recognize or realize that the sun actually communicates to our cells how to function more optimally. Pretty instantaneously, as we put our feet to the earth and walk outside, inflammation calms, the nervous system calms, all these really beautiful things happen. And a lot of us, we know that we feel better when we're outside. We're like, wow, I feel great when I'm out here. But there are actually physiological things that are happening when we're in nature. So that's one of the very first things that I recommend to moms is get outside every single day. Every single day. And when you're feeling overwhelmed, or even if baby is really fussy, you can take baby out and lay baby on the ground in the sun. And I mean, we're not talking like super hot sun like it is right now, and babies like being outside too. And all of us as humans like nature. And so that can be really helpful. Another aspect of our nervous system is communicating safety to the body. And a key component of that is making sure that the body is nourished. So not skipping meals. And I talked about this earlier, but it is so, so common in postpartum for us to just feel overwhelmed, and we forget, and time goes by and we don't realize that we haven't actually eaten something. And so that's another aspect of really supporting the nervous system, our adrenal health, our blood sugar, is we're eating consistent meals, we have snacks on hand and things like that to communicate to the body, I am safe, it's not an emergency.
That snacks are not just for our toddlers.
No.
That snack bag's also for mom. I love what you mentioned about being outside. So I recently heard about the 1,000 hours outside movement, and she essentially says spend 1,000 hours outside each year, which broken down is a lot of time every day.
Yeah.
Don't feel bad if you're not able to do it. She does have a mechanism where you can track, or you can color in your picture to track all of your hours. But I do find that children's regulation, it changes when you're able to kind of like utilize the outdoors. And so, like you were mentioning, sometimes it's too hot, sometimes it's too cold to spend a lot of time outdoors. But maybe just thinking about it in a different way. When can I make pockets of time to be outdoors? When can I go and put my feet in the grass? And when can I get that fresh air for me and my baby or my toddlers or my grown children? And just see how everybody responds differently. It's interesting that seasonal mood disorders, how those tend to be exacerbated in colder times or darker times of the year. And then summertime and springtime comes and everybody just gets outdoors, and then it drops, right? And everybody's feeling great, and there is a correlation there.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we think of sunshine, we think of vitamin D. And yes, sunshine is critical for vitamin D, but there's so many other beautiful things that nature can do for our bodies. And a lot of people, I think intuitively they know that because we feel good in nature, but understanding, no, there are actual things that it's doing, especially for hormones. Sunshine is critical for our hormone health. And so,
well, and using that time in nature too to detach, to disconnect. I see so many moms at the park that are just sitting there on their phones and looking up at the landscape, taking in your horizon, whether that's hills or mountains or trees, you know, like whatever you have around you. If you go out in nature, but then you have your AirPods in the whole time you're on your walk, I think that you might be diminishing the powerful effects that nature can have for the body and the soul and the spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you think about it, if we're out at the park and we're scrolling and we're still stimulating our brain, and there's still a lot of information kind of coming in, versus when we are off our phone, we take our earpods out, or we're present in the moment, that is where the magic happens of actually allowing nature to do what it's designed to do for us.
And speaking of sunlight, you hear too of your circadian rhythm.
Yes.
And the first thing in the morning, if you can just get some sun on your face, that will be a huge way to, move throughout the day. Every week we share a Mom Squad secret, and this week it's from Shannon. She says, anytime you see a mom breastfeeding in public, hand her a bottle of water so we can stay hydrated. So true. It's a great reminder to just always hydrate.
Yeah, we love to share resources with our listeners. Do you have any favorite books or other resources you'd like to share today?
I really love the book Real Food Pregnancy by Lily Nichols. I think that is a good resource for understanding how food affects us and the best foods to kind of prioritize. There's also the book The Postnatal Depletion Cure, which is a really great resource. I would just encourage moms to be mindful of kind of like self-diagnosing or, buying random supplements, because sometimes it can make it worse, but more so just to gain the education around what could be going on and to encourage them to seek help if they're struggling.
Like you mentioned, awareness is the first step to finding your path to recovery and healing. And then also seeking out those experts who have systems and tests in place so that they can help you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It has been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you for having me. I loved being here and chatting with you.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode. We hope you've been elevated and inspired by this week's expert.
Subscribe today so you never miss an episode. And please share our podcast or post on your social media so that other moms and dads-to-be can also have the best birth.
Please note that the information provided is based on the expert's insights and personal experience. It is not intended as medical guidance. Please seek the advice of your medical provider as it applies to your specific condition.